Hello, Kaz Kasozi here, and welcome to my channel. This video is a follow-up on one I did back in April when I did the cover of Prince's Purple Rain. That was the beginning of a series which I called Painting with Notes. I had promised to talk about certain things that went on in the making of that cover, and this particular video will be more interesting for people who are into production and recording. So, if you haven't watched the cover, then I would suggest you first go and watch it. Otherwise, this would not make much sense. So, I've left a link that takes you there. Have a look at it, then come back and join us here. Now, drums were the biggest challenge I had with this particular recording because I wanted a big sound. A big kind of old school rock drums kind of sound. But the drums I had really bad and old skins. But then also I had microphones here that were not really what I would want to use for drums. Since we're in a total lockdown, I couldn't get out and get other things or whatever. I had to use that which was available to me here. So these are the mics that I had at my disposal to record drums. And we have here a condenser microphone, like for dynamic beta 57As, a Doji condenser that I took off an old Sony camera, then a small diaphragm condenser, and finally an SM58. This is the Beta 57A, and I'd never used this, but they're quite similar to the classic SM57, and it does actually a better job in my opinion because it has a wider frequency range, and though this one is made in China, but what isn't these days? Anyway, it feels sturdy enough. I think it will survive. So these went on the snare, on the rack toms, and on the floor tom. On the snare, I had it relatively close and pointing right in the center so I could get a crack of the snare. On the high tom, it was really close but not pointing too much in the center, almost away. Then on the rack tom, the second rack tom, it was at a distance, as you can see there, and pointing in the center. So they had slightly different distances because I wanted to get a little bit more body. And then on the floor tom, more distance still because I wanted to really get the body of the instrument, and when it was too close I wasn't quite getting that kind of feeling. It's worth noting that I had to put like a cushion underneath the tom because there were all these funny resonances coming from the bottom because the skin wasn't good. And then on the rack tom, the high rack tom, I removed the skin altogether because it was just too old to tune properly. And then here is the trusted SM58. It's a vocal microphone, but I used it on the kick drum and I wedged it right in there into the abyss to get this job done. And I made sure that the kick was really well stuffed to cut out all the rumble and waffle. And if you're wondering, at the bottom there, those are my drumming shoes. Then we have this small diaphragm condenser, the SE1A. This poor old fella's had a few knocks in his days that it seems he can't even stay in focus. It still works beautifully, and it gave me the crispest sound and a sparkle to the kit. These normally come in a pair, but one time after a performance at a festival, someone walked off with the other one, so I only have one. Right. This is entry-level large diaphragm mic, and it's a condenser made by Recording Tools, a small company in Germany that makes a lot of nice microphones actually. I've mostly used it on vocals and horns, but you know, it does an all-rounder. And here with those two condensers, I had them at relatively the same height, but they're kind of grabbing different things. So this one is mostly on the cymbals to the right, and then this one concentrated on the crash and the hi-hat the other end. And I tried to point them so that they don't pick up too much direct snare. And finally, we have this decrepit little thing. It's a shotgun microphone that I got off a Sony camcorder that went bonkers. It's supposed to be directional, but once I tried it, I realized that it's actually picking up omni. So I thought, okay, it might be interesting to get some lo-fi kind of sound from it. But no, it was a lousy experiment. So that's the drum kit mic'd up. The microphones were going into the PreSonus Studio Live. I used channel 1 to 8. For some inexplicable reason, the computer wasn't recognizing the desk. So I had to output the stuff as analog, basically from aux outputs. I used aux 1 to 8, and these were going out into the Motu 828 Mark III. And that was my principal sound interface. Okay, we're here in Studio One, and we're going to look at how the mics were routed inside here. So if I click here, we have a look at the inputs here. And as you can see here, they're lined up as mix in 1, mix in 2, mix in 3, up to 8. And basically those are coming in straight from the PreSonus outputs. I still wanted to use the mic preamps on the PreSonus desk. So if we look at the arrange window here, this folder which I called Bobby Z. Bobby Z was the drummer in The Revolution. Basically, this is the drums folder. We have the kick, the snare, the 2 rack toms, floor tom, the 2 overheads, and the experimental mic. And you can see it's muted because after recording, I realized that the experiment didn't actually work out. I didn't like what it was producing. So if you look at the kick and snare, the files look different in the arrange window compared to these other audio files, because after I first listened to the recording, I thought I was going to do a drum replacement. In Studio One, when you prepare files for drum replacement, it shows you like each sample of the drum that you played, and that's why these files look like this, but they're still actually audio, just as these are. Anyway, I decided against it and decided to use the original sounds as they were. Let's have a listen to the drums as they are. So it's passable. On the kick, I used the Waves VEQ3, and I boosted 60 hertz by 6.5 dB, then cut at 360 hertz. Then I boosted at 10 kilohertz to get a little bit of a click. It didn't quite come through. It was kind of like a very boomy sound because of how I'd stuffed the microphone inside the kick drum that was already kind of dampened with pillows and sponge. So it's a very waffly sound. I also used this JJP to give me like some oomph and low end, and mainly here I was trying to get some sub element, some weight, some bottom end to it, because it just wasn't having it because, well, SM58 wasn't picking up enough of that fatness. So I kind of had to generate it. The JJP plugin almost creates some extra frequencies that weren't originally there. I'm not quite sure how it does it, but it does. You get this biff that you seem not to have recorded. So if I take these inserts off, you'll hear the difference. First play when they're on, and then in the middle, I'll take it off. You hear that. Similarly with the snare, I used again Waves VEQ3, and then I boosted at around 120 hertz. I needed to get a little bit of bottom end to the snare still. And then within the mid frequencies, I boosted at 2.4 kilohertz, and also boosted at 10 kilohertz to get like some kind of crack and sizzle. For a compressor, I used just a basic native compressor within Studio One. And so let me play and you have listened to that. And if I cut this off, these 2 inserts off, you can hear immediately quite a difference, like it's less punchy without these 2 inserts here. I put quite a lot of reverb on here, and for reverb, I use the H Reverb by Waves. And I tried not to use several effects. I needed to keep the hunger for processor power low because I was recording the vocal whilst all these other plugins are going on and my machine is not that fast. Since all these things were kind of processing in real time, then I best keep the effects to a minimum. With the toms, I didn't actually fidget too much with the EQ. It is there, but it's there to boost little things like really plain and simple, because already the sound of the skins and the toms wasn't good. So over fidgeting with trying to tweak it, in some ways I was actually making it worse. So I tried to keep it simple to do just some correction. For example, like on Rack Tom 2, I made sure that I boosted at around 4.8 kilohertz to bring out the stick hitting the center of the drum. Same applies to the floor tom here. I cut it at 360 hertz because it had these resonances that I talked about, the kinds which I was trying to stop by putting a cushion underneath the drum, but they were still kind of like there because also the room wasn't treated, so some things are bouncing back in a way that I didn't like. So I cut 360 hertz out. It made it a little bit cleaner. But if you think about it, I really didn't do much, and the compression is all native and very basic, and not so much to bring out anything, but to tame any sound that I may have hit too hard or whatever. Then if we have a look at these overheads here, this one is the recording tools and this one is the SE1. And if you look at the SE1, I raised on the end to get sizzle of the cymbals in comparison to the other one, which is not as bright a microphone in terms of like frequency response. That one I had to push a little bit farther to match up with this one. The overheads are grouped on this channel here, and I basically did some more EQing. If I pushed a dB or so around 310 hertz, there was some element in the snare that got a little bit beefier. And then also there was an irritating ring on the cymbals that was around 12K. So I kind of like dipped that out. Originally, I had done some stuff on the drum bass where all the drums are grouped. But I decided against it afterwards because it was like sounding overproduced, and it was sounding a little bit too pretentious. My thinking generally is that if you're working with like substandard equipment, the more you try to over tweak it, actually the worse you could make it. So I tried to keep things simple. So the main thing was to try and make sure that I point the microphones in such a way that I get the best sound possible. So what is captured is what I pay most attention to, how I'm capturing it. And I tried to tune the drum kit as well as I possibly could, and then tried to position the microphones so that they pick the best they can and avoid as much bleed as possible, so that when I get to this point when things are inside the box, I'm not like piling on all these different plugins to try and correct things. So even though the kit was inadequate, I could still get a good sound without over tweaking inside the box, and you can see that I didn't do very much there, to be honest with you.